In this video, we're going to talk about pivot tables in Google Sheets, when to use them, how to use them, what they do. And honestly, 95% of what I'm going over here will apply for Excel too, or pretty much any other tool that is using something like a pivot table. So pivot tables are very widely used. So if you truly understand what they do and how they work, you should be able to apply that in many different places. And that could be something like Google Sheets, it could be Excel, it could be business analytics or business intelligence tools like Power BI or Google Data Studio or Looker Studio. So all these tools in one way or another, they utilize pivot tables. So if you truly understand how they work, you should be able to apply them to all these different places. So what we're going to learn in this video is when to use pivot tables, what they do. We'll go over things like how to work with dates, how to illustrate things as a percentage. We'll go over how to do some custom calculations in pivot tables or custom value fields, and also some slicers and filters and how it all works. So first of all, let's talk about when to use pivot tables. So we use pivot tables when we want to take a data set like this and go from this to something that looks more like this. So basically, this is the summary based on this data set. So if you look, one of the defining factors for a data set that you could use with a pivot table is when you see this repeating pattern in one of your columns. So notice how the same region, like Southwest or West or Midwest, repeats over and over in this column. So if you look here, see we have West, 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 and then West again, and over and over and over, and this keeps happening many times. So we basically would like to maybe get one total amount that could be total sales or total cost or total number of occurrences of that. And we would like to get that for each one of these different regions here. So if you look here, we have this repeating regions over and over and over. And over here, we basically have one total for each region. So first of all, let me get rid of this. And we're going to start by building a pivot table based on this. So to build a pivot table, your data set has to have this particular format in which the first row in your data is your column names. So only one row with column names should be on top. Doesn't have to be the first row in a spreadsheet, but it has to be the first row. And then if you notice, you have one of your columns that has some sort of repeating value in it, and you have another set of numbers you'd like to sum up. Pivot table would be the ideal tool to get this done. What we're going to do, we're going to get started by highlighting this data. Typically, you can just go like this and scroll down until you get to the end of this thing, which will work. But if you want to do this faster, you could just click someplace here and press Control A or Command A to select current region. And what that's going to do, it's going to start from this cell that you clicked on, and it's going to keep going right, up, down, and left until it hits an empty column or an empty row. Which also means if you're doing this, you want to make sure that you don't have empty rows in your data. So that's why if I've never worked with this data before, I'm going to start by using this scroller all the way on the right to just quickly scroll down and make sure that this Control A shortcut did in fact select the entire thing, and we didn't end up skipping a bunch of lines, or maybe we went way too far. But in this case, as you can see, it did select the data set as it should. So now we can go to this insert menu, and under insert menu, we have pivot table. So I'm going to click on that. It's going to pop up with this, and it's going to say this is the range of data you just selected, which is fine. And then where would you like the report? And we have two options. New worksheet, meaning down here next to this tab that I have called data, it will add another sheet for the pivot table report. Or if you already have an existing spot for this, you can do existing sheet and choose your own spot. So for me right here, I'm going to go new worksheet and I'm going to press create. It's going to start this new sheet. It's going to name this pivot table something. And then here we get this for now. And on the right side, you get the sidebar, and it's going to give you some suggested reports, which I typically don't find very useful, but you might find it useful yourself. I'm just going to close this. But the main thing you want to pay attention to is that here we have rows, columns, values, and filters. And typically, when you start with a pivot table, you want to start with your values field. And the way you understand what values field is by choosing a column on which you're going to apply some sort of function. So if I, for example, navigate back to this data sheet for a second and scroll up, I'm going to go Control up or Command up to scroll up to the top of this. Let's say I want to get total sales. So if I want to get total sales, I need to sum these numbers in the sales column, which means I'm going to have to use the function sum, which will make the sales value field because there's a function involved. Now, your function doesn't have to be sum. It could be count, it could be average, it could be some other function. But as long as there's a function, that would be your value field. So in this case, assuming I want to get total sales amount, I would need some function on sales. So I would go to this pivot table tab and I would open this values field and I would choose that particular column called sales from here. And as I do that, I'll get one total here, which will be basically the total for that whole column. And as you see here, there's this summarized by, and it's under sum. So this is where I can go here and choose a different function. So maybe you don't want to sum those numbers. You wanted to average those numbers. You could go here and do average, and that will give you average number. You can, of course, go here and do median or any other function. So for now, I'm going to start with sum, and then we'll talk about some other functions here as we go forward. Right now, if I do sum, that will give me total amount. So now once you choose the column with a function, then you're going to move on for your columns with no functions. And columns with no functions will go to rows, columns, or filters. So we'll start with rows. So if I go to rows, well, here, when I get this total, I want to get this total now for those different regions. And if I go to my data set again, to this tab, you'll see in region, we have all these regions here, and that's our column called region. So I don't want to sum these regions. I just want to use them as a grouping choice, as a breakdown. And for that reason, this is not a value field. So I'm going to go back to pivot tables, and I'll go to rows. I'll click add. And I'll choose that region column, and you'll see what happens. I get my totals for each one of those regions. Now, I chose rows for region, and because I chose rows, what happened is that these different regions like Midwest, West, Southeast, whatever, they're all listed in different rows in the spreadsheet. Now, if I wanted this same things to be listed in different columns, I could have done that in columns. So if I just X out of this region thing that's currently in rows and go to columns section and use the same exact region column, now you'll see those regions will be listed in a spreadsheet in different columns instead of different rows. Essentially, I get the same report, same numbers, just different layout. So at this point, you choose which layout you prefer. Now, you can always just drag this between these different parts. So I can take this region and move it back to rows here. And you can see it goes back to regions in rows. So you can go both ways. Now, this same region column could also be in filters. So I can take that region now and also drag it to filters section here. And what happens when you drag it in filters, you don't get a list of regions here. Instead, what you get is a filter option here that you can open. And basically, I could clear this and choose one of the regions like Midwest, hit OK. And that should give me just Midwest total. Then I can go here and switch it to like Southeast, get that total. So if you don't want the list, you choose filters. But if you want a list, you want rows or columns. Now, in my case, I'm going to go back here and do select all of these, hit OK. And I'll move it back to rows because I wanted a list. Now, as a result, you get this list, you get your totals, and then also you get a grand total down here. If you don't want to display that grand total for this different choices, you can also uncheck this show totals button, and that would basically not show your totals. or you can click back and you get your totals back. You can also resort this data in different ways. By default, it's going to sort by whatever you have in rows. So currently in rows, I have regions, so it's going to alphabetically sort by region. Now here you can see order is ascending. So if I open this and do descending, it will sort alphabetically by region, Z to A instead of A to Z. Of course, you can go both ways, the way you like, but instead of sorting by region, maybe you want to sort by this total amount. And for that, you can just go by the sort by and choose sort by sum of sales. So I can choose that. And then here it can be ascending, meaning the lowest amount on top or highest down, or we can go descending to have the highest amount on top and lowest all the way down. For now, I'm going to go back to sorted by region column and I'll do ascending, and that's going to be A to Z using regions. So fundamentally, this is the base thing you need to understand about pivot tables. Basically, I was able to take this data set, quickly summarize my total sales by region, and get my totals. Now, what's also really cool about this is that we're not limited to grouping our results by only one column. So what I can do, I can go back to this pivot table, and then I can click add on the rows and choose that sales rep in here. And now you'll see what happens. Not only do I get the total for each region, but then I also get my breakdown by each rep. It's always going to go by the order you choose here. So currently in rows, the first one is region, the second one is sales rep. So therefore, it's going to take the region and break it down by the rep. But I could also just move these things around. So I can go ahead and drag this region below this sales rep. And now sales rep is first, so it's going to give me sales rep total, and then it's going to break it down by region, and then of course we get our total here. So right now, if you look here, we can see Edward's total showing up right here. And then if I scroll all the way down, we also get the grand total down here for the whole thing. Now, if I go ahead and uncheck this first show totals for sales reps, it will remove this grand total down here, but then it will keep all these individual totals we have here. Now, if I uncheck that second show totals, then it will not display both totals. Or maybe I want the opposite, right? Maybe you want to see the grand total, so I can check the show totals here, then I can scroll down and see the grand total, but I don't have those separate totals for each group that shows up on top. So I'm going to check those. Both are fine, so I'll keep my totals, but you choose whichever one you like. We also have this repeat row labels option. And what that's going to do, if you look here, we have this sales rep Edward, and for Edward, we have multiple regions. And that shows the total for multiple regions, all of these for Edward. And right now, Edward just shows up in this top line, but it doesn't show up in this separate lines below, but we kind of understand that this is all Edward's section, but there will be times when you want this to repeat. And if you do, you'll click this repeat row labels and you'll see how Edward will keep repeating for each line like this. So you can choose which design you prefer. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this repeat row labels, and there's this. Now in this particular layout of this report is super long. So as I keep scrolling down, I'm going to see my totals, but it's not a very convenient way of looking at this data. So I can make this a lot more interesting if I just take this region and move it from rows to columns section. And now what will happen, my regions are going to be displayed in different columns in a spreadsheet, while my sales reps are listed in different rows in a spreadsheet. I can still see my totals in the middle here, get my totals. It all works just fine. Again, it's a layout that's easier to view on a single screen. And a lot of times this works a lot better than just stacking everything in rows, and it's a super long thing. Now you can keep breaking this down by other columns too. So if I wanted now to break this down by store, I can take the store. You can, by the way, either drag it from this list from here, or you can click this add. Both ways are fine. So I'm going to take the store and drag it below this sales rep. And now you can see I get the total for the rep. Then I got this each store breakdown But I also have my region breakdown. So you can keep breaking this down by many columns as you see fit. Now I'm going to simplify this. I'm going to remove the store out of here. And I'm also going to remove this sales rep out of here. So I'll move this region now to rows. Now let's also do multiple value fields. And again, the way you choose a value field column is by figuring out whether you're going to be using a function or not. So if you're planning to use a function on that column, then it's a value field. So if I go to my data, so maybe I also want to sum this cost to get total cost. That means I could go to that pivot table, click add under values, choose that cost column. And again, sum is the function I want to apply. And you can see now I get total cost and total sales in the same report. Now, once you start stacking multiple value fields, it needs to decide whether those value fields go in different columns or in different rows. So by default, it's going to basically stack them in different columns in the spreadsheet. But what I can do, I can go here, see it says values as, currently it says columns. I can open this and switch it to rows. And now this multiple value fields right here, which is sum and cost, will be stacked on top of each other in rows as opposed to columns. So again, it's more like a layout preference, so you can choose which layout you prefer if you're doing something like this. Now I'm gonna go back to columns. I did prefer the other one, but no, you have different stacking options you can choose for your value fields too. Another thing you should remember is that you can use the same column multiple times in value fields too. So in this example, I have sum of sales and sum of cost. So two different columns. Let me now remove cost from here. So I'm going to X out of this. And what I'll do, I'll click add in values and choose the same sales column the second time. Now I have sales twice in this report. But now what I could do for the second sales column, I can open this functions list and choose a different function. So for example, for this, maybe I can do average. So now I can get average sales and total sales in the same report, or maybe you can open this and switch it to a different function like count or counta. If you don't understand the difference between counta and count will only count numbers. Counta counts anything that's not blank in that column. And typically, if you're just trying to find how many instances you have of something, counta is probably the one you're gonna choose. So you can see now I get how many, and then I get total sales as well. One more thing I want to go over, I'm going to remove the second value field, again, by Xing out of this, is that in pivot tables, you can display your numbers as just numbers, or you can also display them as a percentage. Maybe I want to know what percent of this total is this number. And the way I could do that, I could go here to this values section, and right next to that function choice here, we also have the show as option, and I can open this and switch it to percent. So right now I want this to be a percent of this total down here, which is the percent of the column. So I'll do percent of column right here. And now you'll see those numbers will display as a percentage as opposed to just the total amount. Now, realistically, however, if you're doing something like this, you probably want both percentages and your totals at the same time. And what I would do to accomplish that, I would simply just go back to default here, which is basically not percentages. And then I would just add the same field again. So I would click add in value fields and add that same sales column here again. And now I got basically just a repeat of the same thing. But now for the second one, I can change this from the default in show as to percent of column. And now we see both our total amounts and percentages in the same report. So I'm going to take this off for now. I'm going to X out of this. Now next, let's try to talk about dates. So first of all, let me go to my data set so you can see what we're dealing with. So if you look here in this A column, we have individual dates of transactions. We have like October 31st, November 18th, June 13th, etc. So maybe I want to use this date in my report as well. So again, we have to choose whether we're going to apply a function on this column or not. So you want to think about, are you going to be summing these dates or averaging them or counting them or maybe getting the max or the minimum, which could be actually valid options like maximum, minimum of your dates. But right now, I'm not trying to do that. I'm still trying to sum my sales, but I want to group it by dates. So if I'm trying to group it by dates, then that's not going to go to values. It's going to go to rows or columns, one of those options. So I'll go to this pivot table tab here. And to make this easy to understand, I'm going to remove this region from rows for now. I'll X out of this and I'll click add and I'm going to choose that date column. And you can see what happens. We get this list of dates. And essentially what's going to happen, assuming you have multiple sales on July 10th, then it would give you the total for that day. And then the next. But a lot of times you want to kind of get it for a month or for a year or something like that. And the way you do that grouping, you just right click on one of these dates in your pivot table and then go to this create pivot date group. And right here, you have many options of grouping. So you can see you have year month, year quarter, month, all these different options. I'm going to start with year so you can see what this looks like. So if I do year, you can see how it was able to just group them to just single years like this. Now, anytime you want to change this, you can right click, go back to create pivot date group, and then choose a different group option. Or maybe you want to go back to your default, which is ungroup. Now I'm going to go back here and choose like year month for a second so you can see what happens. And that's going to give us year month like this. And then the next year, of course, and then the next year after that. And it keeps going like this, which is fine. I mean, it works. Now, one thing you want to be careful about, if I right click on this and go create pivot date group and only choose month, then it's going to give me January total by itself, but this is for multiple years combined for January. Now, one way to break down the years is the option I had a second ago when I went here and I chose year month, which could be okay, but sometimes something that will make your reports look a little more organized is having the years separate from the month. And the way we can do that, we can add that same date column again in our report. So I can go to rows, click add, and choose that same date column again. And now I have the second date column here. So I can right click on my second date column, go to create a group in this pivot table, and use year for this one. So now I got my year breakdown, and because now my month is first, it's first going to give me the month and then the year. Now I can switch that by basically just moving these things. So I can take this year, move it above this, or month, move it below this year. So now year is first, month is second. So therefore you can see the year shows up here and the month shows up here. And what's really cool about this separation of having a separate year and separate month in your pivot table is because now I can take one of those and move it to columns. So now I can take that year from rows and drag it over to columns section. So now we got our years in columns and our months in different rows. And we can see very clearly what's going on year to year, month to month with our sales in this particular case. And maybe you don't want your totals here, you just want your totals down here. And for that, I'll just go ahead and uncheck this totals down here, show totals, and you can see that removes my totals here. These other totals will be your totals over here to get your totals for basically your months combined together, how much it would be, as opposed to years combined together, how much it would be. So you can choose which totals you like, which totals you don't, as we talked about before. And again, you can change this anytime you like. You can right click on one of these, go to create pivot date group, and choose a different option from these. Maybe this time you want to do day of the week option. And that will give us basically Monday, Tuesday, like Sunday, like this. And now we can see year to year how our sales are going on different days of the week. And that's your dates. So assuming you have proper dates in your spreadsheet, it should be that simple to just take your dates and convert them to years, months, or other type of groups in your pivot tables. Now this brings me to filters again. So if you want to take this data and filter by a different column, so maybe I want to see these totals for a particular store, I can then go here, scroll down in the sidebar, and in filters, I can click add and choose that store column. And then it's going to give me this filter down here for stores. I can open this, and instead of having all the stores, I can clear this and choose one of the stores like Art Dress, hit OK, and basically now it gives me my totals for just that store. And essentially we still get the same layout of the report, just filtered to that particular store. Now this is fine, but if you're trying to create more interactive reports when other people are dealing with this, you might not want to use these filters because they're not very easy to find in the sidebar. So what I can do here, I can open this and go back to select all, hit OK, and remove this from filter section. And instead of using a filter, what I can do, I can use a slicer. So slicers you'll find under this data menu. And you can see under data menu, we have this add slicer option. So I'm going to click add a slicer. It's going to give us this. And then on the right side, it's going to ask us which column would you like to filter this on. So I'll choose that same store column right here. And now I can take this and move it over here. And basically the way it's going to work, if I open this, it's going to give me this list. I can clear this, choose one of these columns, again, Art Dress maybe, and hit OK on this. And basically, essentially what this is going to do, it's going to filter to that store again. So then you can open this and choose maybe a different store, hit OK, and that will give you that store. And that's pretty much how this works. You can go back and do select all again to get back to all the results. You can keep adding multiple slicers if you want to filter this by another column. In addition to store, you can go here, do add slicer and choose another column, and that will give you 2 slicers. And that's basically how slicers work. So it's more like interactive if you're doing this for your users instead of just here where it's more like hidden under this filter section. You can do so. Now I'm going to get rid of this. So I'll go here and delete slicer. Now you can see most of these things that I'm doing on my pivot table, I'm doing them using this sidebar. And sometimes it's going to get on your way, or maybe you don't want other users to accidentally change things here. So what you can do, you can simply just close this sidebar. So when it's closed, it's not going to show up anymore. And if you want to get it back, you simply just want to click back here and click on this little edit button, and that will open the sidebar so you can work in this. Now let's talk about changing data and how that affects your pivot tables and your results. So for example, if I go to this data tab down here and update one of my numbers in the spreadsheet. So let's look at one example. If I go to pivot tables and look at these results, and currently if you look in 2022, our total is this much, 2.155. So I'm going to just copy this number and I'll paste it over here so we have something to compare to. So this is currently this number right here. So let's go and change something in 2022 and see what happens to our total here. So I'm going to go to my data and find something in 2022, which this should work. And I'm going to update this sales amount from this amount to a different amount. So I'll do something like 9,000. And at this point, if we go back and look at our pivot table right here, you can see how this number is now different because it will update and give us the new total. Unlike, for example, something like Excel pivot tables, if you're used to Excel pivot tables, this does actually automatically update. In Excel, you have to refresh your pivot table. Here, you don't have to. It auto updates as you change your data. That being said, it will only auto update. Let me delete this. If you just change your existing data set here, but if you end up adding more lines, like if I scroll all the way down, I'm going to do control down, and here you end up adding more rows. Let's just go command up to get back to the top here. Let's say you have now another data point and you enter something like this. And just to make it easy, I'll just copy most of this and paste And I'll simply just update this number. And basically you can imagine, not because I have this 7/2/2024, we probably want that in our report too. But if I go to my pivot table, you'll see that we don't really have 2024 in this report because it will not pick up on those extra lines automatically. At this point, what I would have to do is update here how far this goes in our data set. So if I go to my data, see, this is 1,650 and this is 1,651. So I'm going to go back to my pivot table, and here I'm going to update this range to go to that 51, press enter. And once I do that, you can see now this 2024 appears in our results too, and it shows up in our pivot table just like that. Now, if you do not want to have to do this, one option is to use a table object on your data. So what I can do, I can go to my data here and select this entire data set, Command A. And then I can go to Format, and here I can do Convert to Table. So if you're not familiar with tables, I have a video about tables in Google Sheets. You can watch that separately. But now you can see I made a new table. It's called Table 1 in this upper corner. So I'm going to rename this. So I'll click here and change this to a different name. I'll just call it Transactions, I guess. So if you start by creating a table from your data and then make a pivot table from this. So now if I do Control A or Command A to select this, go to Insert and do a pivot table, you'll notice that your data range will become the name of that table, which is Transactions. And at this point, if you create a new report using that data range and you make, let's say in values, we have sales, and we go to rows, we do like region or something like this. And maybe we'll also add date to do years. So I'll right click here, create pivot date group and choose years. Let's drag one of these two columns. So this is by year, by region. Now at this point, because that was converted to a table, if I go back to that data and scroll down to the bottom of this and add another data point here, and I'll just again copy paste some data so I don't have to spend too much time here. So at this point now, if I go look at this pivot table 5, you'll see how that 2025 is automatically here. I don't have to go here and update the range because now it's linking to that table. And as you add more data points to that table, it will pick up on that automatically. Compare that to this pivot table 4. If I go here it does not, because here it's not linking to that table. Now, if you started by not having a table and then you want to make this using that table, you can still just go here and type the name of that table. And now it will update the same way as you keep adding to your reports. I'm going to delete this new pivot table. So that's your adding data to your existing reports. So if you need this to update as you add, you can do so. As you can see, that's our pivot table now based on that table object. So finally, let's talk about creating custom calculations and why something like that could be useful. And first of all, I'm just going to go back to my data set and delete this couple of extra years that I just did to make this simpler. I'll just delete this couple of lines. And that should update our pivot table accordingly. So one of the things that you may want to add a custom function for is when you try to use some sort of function that's not really available in this list. So one of those functions could be, for example, rows function. So let me give you an example why something like that could be useful. So if you're trying to count number of lines, number of records in a report, well, typically you will do that using counter function. So for example, if I take this sales that I currently have and switch the function from sum to counter, let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go back here and switch this from the sum to counter function. Here you can see we get this number of records. Let's also add this show total so we can see the grand total for all of it combined. Now you can see the combined grand total I get, basically the combined number of records, is this 1,649. If I go to this data tab and scroll all the way down, you'll see that we got 1,650 lines. And because the first line is our headers, that makes it 1,649 records. So that matches up right now. And the reason that's matching is because there are no blanks in this column. But you should remember that functions like counter or count, they do not count blank cells. So if I, for example, delete some of these numbers, so let's say the record exists, but there is no number, then you'll notice that if I go to that pivot table, my total here, 1,646, does not match up with this number of lines from here because counter function doesn't really count number of lines. It counts number of cells in this column that are not blank. Now, assuming you can trust that one of your columns will not have blanks in it, you can just choose that column and use counter for it. But if you don't have a column you can trust, then what you could do is use rows function instead. So to do that, I'm going to go to this pivot table. And right here in this values, I'm going to delete this current sales column as a value field. And I'm going to click on add. And here, instead of using one of these existing columns, I'm going to create what's called calculated field in our pivot table. So I'll click on that. And that's going to give me this, where I'm going to create basically my own formula. And you can see here, the function it's trying to apply is still sum. So I'm going to open this and go to custom function. So this way I can choose my own function I want to use. And here, instead of this, I'll delete the 0 and I'll use function rows in Excel. Now, unlike regular formula builder in Excel, it's not going to auto-complete and open your formulas. So you just have to type your formula. So I'm going to go rows and open parentheses. And then we need to choose the field we're trying to basically use this function on, which is the sales column from here. So I'm going to type sales, close parentheses, press enter. And now you can see how we got our totals again. But this time, notice how I got 1,649, which is actually the number of lines. Because rows function doesn't care if there's a blank or not. It will actually count number of rows, which will end up being essentially the number of records. Now, if I do a calculated field, it's going to give these names like calculated field 1, which you may not necessarily like. Now you can see here it shows up here like calculated field 1. So you can just go up here and type over this. So I can just call this number of records. And now you can see as I did that here, it will also rename this field name here to number of records. And that will give you this whole arsenal of different functions you can use in your actual value fields. Now, let me also give you another example. So maybe instead of just applying a different function to one column, you want to get some sort of difference. Maybe I want to calculate total sales minus total cost and see what the difference is after cost for sales. And I want to call that profit or gross profit or something like that. So for this, I can go back to this pivot table and right here, again, I can choose to create a calculated field. So I can say, let's do a sum, open parentheses, because I want to sum those numbers this time, not average them or something. And then I'm going to take sales. Now then I'm going to close parentheses. So far, this will just sum the sales if I hit enter. And then what I can do minus the sum of cost column. So now we'll take the sum of sales minus the sum of cost and basically get the difference of those. And then on top here, I can rename this to gross profit. And you can do calculated fields like this, or maybe you want to take the cost and divide it by sales to get some sort of percentage. Now, what's also super cool about pivot tables in Google Sheets is that you can also link some of these formulas to some external cells that are not a part of this pivot table. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to add a couple of rows here. So I'm going to right click and add a few rows. And let's say on top of here, I'll just say commission rate. And let's say our commission rate is going to be some percentage of this gross profit. So I'll go here and enter, let's say 12%. So now what I can do, now currently this sum of sales minus sum of cost just gives me gross profit. So now what I can do, I can put this whole thing in parentheses because of order operations. We have to do that, this minus this first. And then here I can do times. And of course, I can just go here and type like 12% directly in a formula. And if I enter, that will calculate 12% of those numbers, which is fine. But it's not going to be linked to this cell up here. But I can also link it to this cell, this B1, which means that up here, instead of this 12%, I can just type B1. Now notice when I did B1, this whole thing gives me this reference error. And the reason for that is because if I want this B1 to be multiplied by all the cells, I need that B1 to be an absolute reference. So think about when you drag a formula and you link to one cell on top, you want that to keep linking to that cell. So that's why now I'm getting this reference error. Now I'm going to go back here and delete that. And instead I'm going to do $B, $1. You can do uppercase or lowercase b, doesn't matter. Now if I'd enter, see, I don't get a reference error. So now we're pointing to that B1 cell. And now we essentially got our totals. And let's just go ahead and just apply some currency format for this to make it look nice. So now at this point, because it's linking to the cell, I should be able to go here and change this to, let's say, 17%. And notice how automatically all the calculations in the pivot table update because this entire thing is linking to the cell now. So using this custom formulas in your pivot tables, you can also link to a particular cell in your spreadsheet. Super unique thing in Google Sheets pivot tables you can do. And at this point, of course, this is not gross profit anymore, so I'll call it commission. And there you go. That's pivot tables for you. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.